Hello, and welcome to On Point. I'm Max Goen. The biggest obstacle to mental health awareness is the stigma attached to mental illness. That stigma stems from many people in the United States falsely connecting mental illness with violence and dysfunction. Mental health conditions are the most prominent cause of disability across the United States, yet less than half of adults get the treatment that they need. Today, we will be examining mental health issues with our panel, the ways we can address mental health correctly, and detach the stigmas. On Point's Stephanie Martinez has more on the story.
Thank you, Max. Now I'd like to welcome our guest, Ebony Harper, Masters of Social Work candidate and Community Advisor for Student Housing, Michelle Thomas, a board member with the National Alliance of Mental Illness, Stephen Wang, graduate student at CSUN's Counseling Services and runs CSUN's Blues Project. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having us.
Okay, so the first question is, what is a mental illness? And we'll start with you, Stephen.
Mental illness can be described in many ways. It can be an emotional state. It's also seen as a medical term, an illness as well. Depending on the student, there's a wide range of mental illness there. With the Blues Project specifically, we focus on suicide and depression in particular. And yeah, there's different ways to describe it. For everyone, it's different. And the one thing that I tell a lot of students is that, especially with mental illness, that it does not discriminate, whether you're a different gender, different sexual orientation, if you were part of the military, a civilian, it doesn't matter. It can affect anyone.
Michelle, do you want to add anything?
Yes, as being a person with lived experience with mental illness, I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder of June in 2000, and it, even within the scope of having bipolar disorder, there's commonalities in the symptoms, but depending on what your triggers are, it'll manifest differently. So yeah, it's a wide range, just as he was talking about it. It doesn't discriminate, all walks of life. So yeah.
Ebony, do you have anything?
I mean, just to piggyback off what Stephen and Michelle saying, it doesn't discriminate. Anybody from any identity, any culture, any background experiences mental illness. Of course, it looks different, but it varies, and it's a wide range, and it's on a spectrum.
And what are the most common types of mental illnesses seen in students? We can go with you.
Definitely depression is number one on college campuses. There's so much statistics on it. 1 in 4 students are more likely to have depression, and it's not treated. Stress would be on that spectrum as well. Hence why at the CSUN we have the Oasis Center where students can kind of get that feeling out, so then they can focus on other things as well.
Ebony,
I would also say anxiety. From my personal experience working in the juvenile hall and interning at the district, we see a lot of kids who just struggle with anxiety, especially in middle school years and adolescence, where it's a lot of emphasis on being accepted socially by their schools. And so they struggle with that. They worry about, will they be accepted? In the juvenile system, anxiety is prevalent as well, because these are boys and girls going in and out of jail. They have court. They don't know what's going on with their families. And so they struggle a lot with anxiety as well.
Definitely. A recent New York Times article mentions that students are experiencing severe anxiety more than depression. Why do you think that is? Stephen, we can go with you.
I think, many factors, I would say, especially with the climate change and kind of the political times, that could be part of it. It could be the studies and the pressure of graduating earlier than one might be capable of doing. There's a lot of factors, and I wouldn't say there's one specific thing. It could be culture or family as well.
Michelle, did you want to add anything?
I'm not that familiar with as far as being on campus, but as being advocating for people with mental illness, I just had a group where we were discussing the media and how that affects, our mood, and there is a lot of anxiety and depression due to the climate the way the political system, and we've just been discussing, tuning out. Sometimes you just, it's just too much, and people get overwhelmed, and it's the simplest thing to do is not watch, or what I do for myself is just limit the time that I put in to kind of prevent that from happening, so yeah.
And where do the stigmas that come with mental illnesses, where do they come from? How do they start?
That's also a wide range too. Definitely, at least with my research, family has a big contribution to that. The societal pressure, the idea of that there's something wrong with you if you have a mental illness. Yeah, there's just so much out there, but the ones, at least working with my students and in my master's program, we've seen family pressure and just different types of pressure all over.
I think the stigma a lot of times, from my experience, come from people not being familiar or just not knowing really what the behaviors are, or not familiar with the behaviors. So it can be seen as acting out, or you have behavioral problems, or you're uncontrollable. And so then you get a stigma, or you get this thing where people don't want to be around you, or people don't want to deal with you because something's wrong, like Stephen said.
How difficult is it to have politicians and the president associating mental illness with violence? Like something that just occurred, like mass shooting, like how difficult is that?
Yes, the media has such a big influence over the whole mental illness topic, population. I actually just led a workshop and a discussion with our students and how media portrays using the language, the way they associate mental illness. So one term that is used a lot is commit suicide, which, in history, commit means you've done something wrong, it's a crime. And I believe part of the law is like you commit a suicide, you are considered a criminal, even though you've passed on and moved on. The correct terminology is died by suicide.
Yes.
Or completed suicide or attempted suicide. The idea you also want to keep in mind is you want to put the person first. It's there's so much that we put emphasis on, but we forget about the person at first instead of the mental illness. We put, a lot of media put, this is what happened to them because of this, instead of this is the person, and this person had a hard time or was suffering because of this disease.
Ebony, did you have something?
Yeah, it's the same thing with, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, it's okay. Go ahead.
It's the same thing with social work. Our code of ethics is putting the human being first. And so a lot of times, I don't do a lot of clinical work, but I do work with clients who experience mental illness. And so for us, it is our job to make sure they are seen as a person first, and then get the resources that they need to assist them with what they're experiencing.
Michelle, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I was just going to comment on towards the stigma. Also was a lack of knowledge, and that's what my chief role in NAMI is, to educate. And it's even culturally, you have to deal with people not understanding what mental illness is. It has many faces, and I tend to let people know that most of the time you wouldn't even know someone had a mental illness unless their symptoms are active. Yes. And as far as the media, I think the reporters are too quick to jump to conclusions based on what someone has done, when statistically most people with mental health issues are not violent, but they only focus on that aspect of it. So the minute someone does something, they automatically assume that there's a mental health issue, and that's part of stigma as well. So.
Yeah, it's part of that grouping too, like all these people are all the same. Yes. Even if they have depression, they all look the same. Depression looks different for everyone.
Exactly. Yes. It's a spectrum, definitely.
If someone believes that they are mentally ill, what is the first step for them? Ebony, we can go with you.
I would say just connecting themselves with somebody who can refer them to someone. I know a lot of times for people it's the family first, and sometimes the family is not always knowledgeable about knowing who to turn to. I know a lot of times for us, and you all can speak to it, but a lot of times for us in my field, we'll call something like 211 and let them know, like, this is what we're experiencing. Can you kind of direct us in the right direction? If you're on a campus and you're a student, it's probably more easily accessible to find the resources that you need.
Michelle, did you want to add something?
I was going to say that's where NAMI comes in. You can go online and find I think there's like 12 different affiliates throughout Los Angeles, and they have Family to Family, which deals with family members and educating the family members, Peer to Peer, which educates peers about their mental illness, and they have NAMI Basics. That's for if you have a loved one that's an adolescent. And so there's various resources that one can address if they go online and just look up NAMI. So it's out there. And I was just thinking back to when I first got diagnosed, my family didn't know what was going on, and just oftentimes the first contact is the emergency room. So I would say just having the emergency staff more versed in what mental health looks like, because often they think you're on drugs, and that's not the case. So
Yeah.
so it all comes back to education, I think.
Yeah, and just to add on top of it, especially what you said about education, even self-knowledge is important. Letting them know like what is going on with them, what does that symptom looks like. I think especially with the Blues Project, when I work with, we do psychoeducational presentations for our students on campus and to staff and faculty across the CSUN's campus, educating them what the symptoms look like, what are the warning signs, either for themselves or their loved ones. So that education piece, just emphasizing that, knowing what mental illness may look for them.
So if a young adult or a student didn't have health insurance or health care, could they still be treated? What resources are there for them?
Yes, they can. The county, Los Angeles County, has a lot of resources that are available that are free or on a sliding scale. So.
Can people stabilize a mental illness simply with medication alone, or is there other activities or something else besides medication? Michelle?
Okay. I would say medication is really just a small part of it, in my experience. For me, it's all the coping skill that I've gained, and like I will refer back to the peer-to-peer program, was life-changing for me. And it taught me what my triggers are and how to manage my symptoms as they relate to me. It's a very individualized program. And so from that, I would say, it's the medication is part of it. It's having a good support system. It's just being active and being around positive people. And I'm also a NAMI facilitator for a group called Connection, and it's peer support, and that has been life-changing. Just having that support every week to come to is, so I think it's a combination of everything. Just the medication is really just a really small part of having to help manage symptoms.
Are there any racial groups that are most likely to be attacked, to have a mental illness?
No, I think as we all kind of agreed on before, there's mental illness doesn't discriminate. You might be more prone to it based on research, biologically, genetically, but doesn't mean that you will have it. And also the whole idea of like you can't catch mental illness as well, and that's another stigma of the whole population as well. So,
and something that's unfortunate is it doesn't have a bias, but when we're talking about resources available and who's actually receiving those resources, African Americans and Latinos, it's very low for them to be able to receive those resources or have access to those resources.
And why do you think that is?
I mean, oppressive systems, oppression, different people, cultural and racial identity, just the way the system is set up, institutional oppression.
Michelle, did you want to add something?
Oftentimes, someone that has a mental health issue won't even know that they have it. And once they do find out, there's stigma within, you have self-stigma, before you get diagnosed, you have your own preconceived notions about what mental illness is, and then once it happens to you, then you're dealing with that, and the cultural aspects of it is just like Ebony was saying. First of all, in the African American and the Latino community, a lot of times, no, we don't talk about it. I mean, the door, as I see it, is opening, just starting to, which is good, and that's one of the things that I do is try to keep that dialogue going within the community and say, hey, here we are, we all have like that relative that, no one talks about, and, and hey, it's okay, it's treatable. And I like to refer to being like someone with diabetes. You wouldn't tell them to stop taking their insulin. Mm-hmm. So if you have a mental health issue, it's a chemical imbalance, and oftentimes the medication brings it into balance. So just starting with that aspect of it is, I think, would just do wonders within, people's own families, because I think that's where it starts, because the stigma is so entrenched within, the families that I think if one is comfortable enough to say, to your family member, look, this is what's going on with me, because a long time before you get diagnosed, symptoms appear, so.
So we interviewed CSUN students whether or not they'd be public or private about their mental illness, and this is what they had to say.
So I think I'd be public about it. I mean, I'd have no qualms with sharing it with people I was close with, just because I think that's a part of me, and I think that they should know that. But in terms of just sharing it with people on the street, probably not. And I think it kind of plays into I guess the stigmas associated with mental illness and society. I actually have friends who think who have misconceptions about mental illness, so it'd even be hard to tell them.
Private, because I'm a shy person, so I wouldn't want everybody to know,
I would be public about it because I feel like keeping it in does a lot more damage than it does not letting it out, because once you keep that internal illness inside of you, it creates a lot of toxicity, and it's better to have that information out for everybody to see it, so that way other people can help you instead of, like I said, just letting it sit there and bubble up.
If I had a mental illness, I would be pretty public about it. I'm pretty confident talking about all my stuff, and I feel the more you talk about it, the more accepting people are of it, and it becomes more of a general topic, that it's acceptable.
Personally, me, I think I'm an open person. I'm kind of social, so I think I can be open about it, but I know a lot of people that it's hard for them to reach out, just because there's people I believe that need an extra hand. I mean, an easier way for them to reach help. There is definitely help out there, but I just think there needs to be a little bit more, a lot easier.
So for some, it's very hard to talk about a mental illness, but how can we make this topic more welcoming? Ebony?
I think education, normalizing that mental illness affects everyone from every climate. A big piece of it is normalizing it and making people understand that it's okay, it's a regular experience, and not everybody, but some people go through it. And so I think in educating people.
And using proper language and being able to address it properly, and sharing your stories, I think, helps others as well, and finding that community that can, either you creating that community for others or being part of that community to support others.
So this past week, we had an event, Beat the Blues. Can you, Stephen, explain to us what Beat the Blues is all about, and what resources do they have to offer?
Of course. Beat the Blues Week was a week-long event. It started on the the 30th of October till November 3rd. And throughout the week, we had various workshops. Our theme this year was there's unity in our diversity, especially with the climate politics and whatnot. We wanted to make sure that all communities were heard, and we wanted to make sure that we were all together, united to be able to break the stigma. And so we had workshops throughout the week from different populations. We had the Black and African American communities, we had the Asian Americans, we had the LGBTQIA+ communities, and a lot more, just to kind of bring us together. In addition to, we had a tabling event where we had different on-campus and off-campus resources, such as NAMI, and they were providing great information and different resources to help students get that extra support. And then just making a statement, having conversations, and just kind of being visible to the rest of the community that it's okay to talk about mental health, and it's okay to be not okay.
Yes. So mental illness starts at the age of 14. Do you believe high school students should be more aware of this type of topic, this issue, and why? Ebony?
Of course. Even when I was watching the video, I said, wow, this video is kind of biased because these are students who are informed and they're educated. And so they have that understanding of it's okay to come out, it's okay to talk about it, you have support, because they're becoming informed about it, you know? And so if high school students were more informed and educated and know that they have a support system, even if they had parenting classes in the high schools that talked about it, then you would see high school students or middle school students being more open to talk about it and even identifying the symptoms.
I think the conversation should start in elementary school, because oftentimes symptoms appear at a young age. It's just not recognized, you know. So I would say even earlier than high school, and to refer to it, everyone has mental health. Instead of saying mental illness, it's a health issue. And you know, the more educated you are, just think how I'm looking at, you guys are a lot younger than me, and the conversation with the video, that, like you said, they were informed. And just think if education started as early as kindergarten, how the society would be. You know, it's already changing, the climate is changing, and that's a good thing. So the earlier the better, you know.
Yeah, I definitely agree. In terms of the earlier the better. Also, having that conversation in the families, because who are they most around? Their parents, their relatives, their cousins, and so forth. Having that conversation start there. So hopefully the students in the video are having that conversation with their families already, or they're going to workshops and getting more educated so that they can spread that information. But definitely having systems in the elementary school, in the high school, will be a big benefit to them to feel more comfortable for the conversation.
And then NAMI does have a program called Ending the Silence, that we go out and we speak to high school students, and there are actually starting to be NAMI groups on high school campuses. So, oh, wow. Cool. Yeah, so definitely the conversations are getting started.
90% of people who die from suicide suffer with a mental illness. How do we know if someone is struggling? How do we know if someone is having suicidal thoughts? Ebony?
From my experience, I don't know how you know people are having suicidal thoughts. One thing that I have learned is if kids even joke around and say, I feel like killing myself, or, you know, just something so small like that, I ask them directly, you know, do you want to kill yourself? I take it extremely seriously, because for me, the signs aren't there as much. But if they're talking like that, then I address it as soon as possible.
Michelle,
that's what I was going to say. Is anytime you hear someone say, you know, they don't want to be here, or they wish they were dead, and a lot of times people tend to think somebody's seeking out attention, but yeah, that is a cry for help. And to always take it seriously, no matter, you know, how often one says it, just it's always should be taken seriously, because that could be the difference in them still being here, you know. So,
Stephen?
I definitely agree. The language is a big part of it. Some other signs would be if they're in an education setting, so not going to classes. That can be a slow sign. Other things would be not sleeping well, either getting too much sleep or too little sleep. There's a list of signs and warning signs that students can look out for, but usually kind of the lack of sleep, focus, motivation, and the language they start to use around their peers, their family, and just not having that energy to kind of move forward.
And what are the best resources for suicide prevention? Stephen, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I would definitely recommend using a therapist. There's a lot of stigma around that as well, but having that extra support, getting that that professional point of view to help them kind of see and kind of guide them to see what else that they can do to help themselves. Using campus resources, we have our Clot Center, we have our University Counseling Center, which is free to students. We have our on-campus different departments, the LGBTQIA+ center, the Pride Center, to kind of have that conversation, to kind of feel a sense of belonging, a sense of community, and then that's when it kind of all starts and going on.
Michelle, did you want to say something?
I was just going to say with just NAMI would be, of course, a great resource, and there's many outreach centers and the Warm Line, different call centers. Even if your loved one you hear a comment and you don't know what to do, you can reach out and call, the helpline to, find out what you can do. And like you said, with, counseling. And it could be in the form of just peer support. Is a big step too. It's just taking that initial step to first admitting that it's going on. I think that would be the biggest thing, because a lot of times symptoms are happening, and I know with me, I just didn't want to, realize what was really going on. I knew something was kind of off, but just taking that first initial step to getting help, and after that, it just became, that was the hardest, just that first step that it took to say, okay, well, let me go talk to somebody. So.
Well, that's all the time that we have, and I want to thank everyone for joining me.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for watching On Point. For more information on mental health awareness, please visit NAMI's website or the Blues Project at CSUN. You can follow us on social media at CSUN On Point. You can hear us at KCSN 88.5 FM on Sunday mornings at 5:30. You can watch us on Santa Clarita Valley Television on Sundays at 5 and on LA 36 at 8:30 Friday mornings. For all of us here at On Point, I'm Max Goen.